Hi, I'm Mitch, and welcome to the Restoration Road as we begin a three-part series with one of the most incredible stories I have ever heard. Today's guest is Marisa Hanlon, and her journey is going to take you on a roller coaster ride through addiction and recovery unlike any you have probably ever heard. You know, I couldn't help but think about 2 Corinthians 1, 3 through 5, and how it will unfold in Marisa's story. Paul wrote, "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort. He comforts us in all our troubles so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. For just as we share abundantly in the sufferings of Christ, so also our comfort abounds through Christ." Comfort means literally to come alongside and strengthen together. Whatever you're going through, I invite you to reach out to the people of God, reach into the Word of God, and reach up to the Spirit of God, who will make you new, who will comfort you in whatever your struggle is. He will restore you, who will make you new again, and He will use you to bring that comfort to others. Marisa, thank you so much for being with us today. You have an amazing story, and I think we should just get right into it. I think you should just talk about growing up and what that was like for you.
I was born in California in 1972. My parents were babies when they had me. They were sophomores in high school. My father was a drug dealer. He had been on drugs. He was like the bad boy, and my mom was, the good girl, and they ended up having me. They only stayed together for 2 years. But throughout my childhood, my really early years, it was the 70s. They were young. And so drugs were just kind of all around me. My father, like I said, he just progressed in his drug dealing lifestyle. And my mom tried to do the best that she could. But, she was a baby, and she had her own substance abuse issues as well.
Had they dropped out of school, or were you living with your grandparents technically, or how did that work?
No, I stayed with my mom. They did drop out of school. And my father was never really, he never had his own place to live, or my whole life. He's never had a phone number that I could call him or a place to live. And so he kind of went his own way, and he was in and out of my life whenever he wanted to be. And my mom, they never got married. My mom ended up, after she left him, she married my stepfather, who essentially raised me.
Okay. And how old were you roughly when she married your stepfather?
I was 3.
3? Mm-hmm. So he gets to be almost all you know in that scenario. What happens next in your childhood?
Well, my stepfather, I have a lot of respect for him. He too did the best he could. But it was kind of, I always struggled with the fact that I wanted my dad to love me. And my dad would show up, my real dad would show up, and then take me for the week or take me for the weekend. And he was always high, and I was, it was a chaotic life that he led. So my stepdad tried to protect me from that, but the way that I viewed it was that he didn't want me to have my real dad in my life. And so there was kind of this turmoil all throughout my childhood that I resented my stepdad for that, but at the same time, his love came with conditions. He wanted me to be in sports, and he wanted me to do this and that, and if I didn't feel accepted by him.
Yeah.
My mom and him had kind of a rocky marriage. My mom would hide a lot of things from him, kind of to protect, like she would take me to see my real dad, and
And then hide the
this
fact
big
that you did.
secret. Yeah. And so there was like a lot of turmoil in my childhood. And when my real dad, when I would see him, the only thing that we would do is drugs together.
How old were you when you started drug use?
12.
Oh my goodness.
I was
And
12 years old.
in a way, looking back, did you think that was like his way of trying to connect with you?
Yeah, that was how he showed his love. My dad told me my whole life that I would grow up to be a drug addict, just like the rest of his family. My whole family suffers from addiction, my dad's side. And so I believed him. By the time I was 12, I knew how to do every kind of drug there was. I knew how to do it, what it was. It was just kind of part of my life. My dad was honest about his substance abuse. He told me, I'm a drug addict and you're going to be one too. My mom was kind of tried to hide it. She was, never would admit it, even if it was obvious. And so she would just kind of go in the bathroom and get high and then come out and act like everything was fine. And after my stepdad and her got divorced, their divorce got really ugly, and my mom just spiraled out of control at that point.
Into addiction? Mm-hmm. Trying to medicate her pain, probably.
Yes.
And then you start taking an interest in boys somewhere along this line?
Yes. I was high school sweethearts with this boy that kind of had a story that I felt like that was similar to mine. His family was dysfunctional, and his mom wasn't in his life. She was in prison. And so we kind of, at the time, we were kind of like all we had, And so we just kind of fell in love. And I found myself pregnant at 16.
Just out of coincidence, are you a sophomore then? Or
I was a junior.
junior?
Mm-hmm. And I knew I had no business being pregnant at the time. I knew that I shouldn't be with him. He was highly abusive, but I just wanted to have a family.
So what'd you do? You find out you're pregnant. Do you tell mom? Do you keep it a secret? And what was the plan?
Yeah, I moved. By that time, I'd moved out of the house, and I was kind of homeless. I mean, it was a really bad time in my life. I found this couple that needed a babysitter, and God really put them in my life because they needed a babysitter, and so they offered me a place to live in exchange for full-time babysitting, so that way I could stay there and have my baby. And so I stayed with them for about 8 months, and she, showed me, I didn't know what to expect. There was things, when you're pregnant, things are changing, and so she was there for me. At that point, my mom was in a very bad place. We weren't getting along at all, and
She's not taking interest in your child either?
her addiction was probably the worst it had ever been. So
it's not really who she is then
Yeah.
in the moment. She's somebody else.
yeah, and she was in a really dysfunctional relationship that was also abusive. By the time I had my son, I only stayed with his father for a few months longer. He was so abusive, I couldn't take it anymore. And so I left him, and I begged my mom to let me move back in. And I moved back in with her for a while. And that didn't last very long.
How do her legal troubles start?
I moved out, and just a few months later, the man that she was with was really abusive, and they were both on drugs. They were both in a bad place in life. And I knew that I could see it happening, the downward spiral. And my mom, just one day, shot him in the front yard in self-defense. And my life changed forever that day. I had called my mom's house, and I had this really weird feeling that something bad had just happened, so I kept calling her house. And finally, the police department answers, and I thought I had the wrong number. And they asked me who I was. So I told them, and they told me to come over immediately. And so as soon as I pulled around the corner, the whole yard was taped off, and I just saw blood everywhere. And it was definitely a crime scene.
Oh my, it's got to feel almost surreal, like it's a movie or something that's not really connected to you.
Yeah, I didn't know that I was in shock, but I was in shock for quite a while because I just sat there and I didn't know. I couldn't cry. I just didn't know what it was. Actually, I was in so much shock that I thought that she just went to jail and she was getting out soon. You know, I didn't really, I wasn't thinking logically at the time.
So what happened with your mom?
My mom got a life sentence. She got sentenced to life, and
what did you do?
At that point, I was homeless, and I was living on the streets of Los Angeles. I was living in an abandoned. First, I was living in an abandoned car, and then I was living in an abandoned building, and it had running water, so that was awesome.
How did you eat?
I stole food and clothes, just the basic essentials.
Is it just you?
Yes, I sent my son was living with his father at the time. My dad showed up after this happened, and he just made everything worse. I mean, the only thing my dad's ever done for me is get me strung out, steal from me, lie to me. So I was just kind of in a place where I was so lost. I was so lost, and I didn't know how to get out of that.
So what'd you decide to do?
Well, I intentionally decided to numb myself with drugs. My dad was there to help me with that, and I can't even tell you how many times I've gotten high with my dad, more than I've ever gotten high with anybody else. And it was almost like he liked it, you know, it made him feel better about himself. And so I just intentionally, I didn't know how to deal with something of this magnitude. You know, not only was my mom gone, but she got sentenced to life, and somebody died, you know? And how do people get past that, you know? And so I just stayed numb for 4 years. For 4 years, I don't remember 4 years of my life.
And are you living in the abandoned building, or are you living with your dad, or both?
My dad never had a place to live. I eventually moved out of there and, you know, moved into my own apartment. And then I would literally stay there. I mean, I would literally have a place to live for like 2 months. And it was just, I was just constantly behind in life. So, you know, of course, everything that I did was just temporary.
Yeah, so you'd go to an apartment, not pay the rent, get evicted, go to a new one.
Yeah, and we're talking about Los Angeles, where, I mean, you know, the cost of living is outrageous.
Yeah.
And in between that time, I had started college, and I ended up quitting. I had to drop out because I was working, and then I would, you know, quit my job. It was just a vicious roller coaster. And by the time I was strung out, I just wanted to be. I just wanted the pain to go away.
So what becomes a catalyst to head east?
I was on drugs so bad that I could not function without them. I could feel myself starting to decline. And one day I just went to sleep and I didn't wake up. I bled to death. And my friend, I was at my friend's house, and she found me. And by the time the ambulance got there, they revived me. And they revived me.
Can you recall anything like that? Can you recall a light departing from your body, anything like that?
Yes, actually, I had this really crazy dream while this was happening. I didn't know what was happening because clearly I wasn't conscious. But I had this really crazy dream. I was on the beach, and it was really peaceful. It was really peaceful, and I was talking to this guy. I don't know who he was, but he told me that my life's not done, that there's still more for me to do. And I remember waking up to that, and I didn't even know when I woke up that I was upside down because all my veins had collapsed, and I had lost my blood pressure. I I had no blood pressure, and my veins had collapsed. And I had no idea that I was upside down when I came to, and I just remember all these lights around me, and I had no idea what had happened.
My goodness. So I assume you're in the hospital, and they get you back to in decent shape?
Yeah, I woke up all alone. I woke up all alone.
No visitors?
No visitors. And actually, the only person that was there was the ambulance driver. He stayed there with me.
Oh, my goodness.
I know that God sent him. I know God sent him because all the hospitals denied me because I didn't have insurance. When they were reviving me in the ambulance, they kept saying they didn't have any beds. And the ambulance driver told them that he's not going to let me die. And so he brought me to the hospital, even though they said they wouldn't take me.
Oh, my goodness.
And he didn't leave my side. He didn't leave my side till I woke up. And I remember I woke up and there was a stranger by my bed. And I didn't know, I had no idea what was going on. Nobody was there. And I know, when my whole family got a life sentence with what happened to my mom, especially me and my sister. Everybody needs someone to blame. Everybody needs a way to escape it. And so everybody was, I don't blame anybody in my family, but everybody was suffering and everybody was trying to deal with it. And it's a really, how do you deal with that? It's kind of one of those things where you kind of learn over time. The fact that I was on drugs just made it worse because, then they justified why they weren't there for me and why, I know that there was a lot of times throughout those 4 years, my uncle wouldn't even let me in his house to feed me or anything. It was just a really bad time in my life. But so when I woke up alone, and I realized that I was just gonna, it was time. It was time.
Just to get out of there?
Yeah, it was time to start over. I was gonna start over completely fresh.
So did you have a vehicle?
Yes. It was a very interesting vehicle. Actually, if I had it now, it might be in here restored.
And you hop in that thing and you just point it
Yep.
away from the West Coast?
Yep. As soon as I left the hospital, I grabbed some clothes. I threw them in the back. And the truck was super cool. It was a 1956 Chevy step-side truck.
Come on now. I've auctioned lots of those.
I know. That's what I'm saying. And so, but it didn't have any, the only window it had was the windshield. It didn't have any, the wraparound windows and the side windows were missing. So I went and bought a bunch of plastic and taped them up. And I just started driving. Back then we didn't have cell phones. So I just grabbed a map of the United States and I just got on the Interstate 10 and started driving. And I didn't have I had no plates on this car because in California you have to pass a smog test.
Yep.
And
I'm quite aware of that.
So if you don't pass the smog test, you're not getting your car registered.
Right.
Okay, so
And that wasn't passing the smog test.
yeah.
Was it?
By the way, none of my cars ever did. I've always had hoopties, but so I didn't have any plates. I didn't have a license. I didn't have insurance. And I made it all the way. I made it 2,000 miles without getting pulled over.
I think you get to Kentucky and you cross into Indiana and it breaks down.
I get to Kentucky and I was experiencing, it took me 2 weeks to get here because I was just like, this is probably the only time I'm ever gonna be able to drive through the country. I might as well have fun while I'm doing that. And so I'd stopped a few states and visited people I might have knew or whatever. But by the time I got to Indiana, I would have to pull over every state and change the plastic. And I didn't have a radio. So the whole way here for 2,000 miles, it was just smacking. The plastic is just smacking.
That's your music, a beat. Percussion. I guess you had percussion.
Yeah, and so I would change the plastic about every other state. And
are you clean and sober, or are you doing drugs on your way here?
No, I'm doing drugs on my way here. I was strung out. Yeah, I ended up in Kentucky, and my car started putting really bad. So I knew I was like, I might have one more state. I don't know if I can get another state out of this car right now. And so I pulled over to get a hotel, and this was in Louisville, Kentucky, and the guy told me, if you go across the bridge to Indiana, the hotels were cheaper there. So I did. I rented a hotel rented a hotel, and then I got found an apartment, and I paid for 6 months of this. I just paid cash 6 months, and that way I knew that I could just stay there and come down and get my mind right.
So everything you had, you put into cash or whatever was all you had, and you had
Yes.
enough to do the 6 months, so you got a
Yes.
place to land. Okay. What happens next?
And so I was really sick for a long time, for probably 2 months, really super sick. And then eventually, over probably 3 or 4 months, I started getting my energy back and started feeling healthier. And so I went and got a job. Minimum wage was $4.25.
What were you doing?
I worked at this clothing store. I was doing good. I was working there, and I'd been clean for 6 months, and I had an apartment. And then, out of the blue, I didn't tell anybody where I went. I told nobody.
Don't have your son yet, right?
No, I was waiting till I was better. Out of the blue, my dad shows up. I didn't tell anybody where I lived.
Your biological dad?
Yeah,
shows
my
up?
biological dad shows up. And it was Christmas time. I was really lonely. I didn't have anybody yet. And I should have never let him in. I was just shocked. I mean, I don't know why he was in Indiana. And
How did he know where you were?
my grandma told him,
Okay.
even though both of my grandmas are the only people that knew where I was. And I told him not to tell, but...
They did.
So he showed up, and he never left. He kind of took over my apartment. For Christmas, it was Christmas time, and he had it was a clear bag about this big with methamphetamine in it, and it had a little bow on it. And he was like, "Merry Christmas." And so I told him, I've been clean, and I ended up getting high that night.
And that's highly addictive, right? That keeps you awake,
Yeah,
keeps
it's
you
highly
energized, and so it begins a strong, I guess, addiction to meth.
Yes, it's very highly addictive. Yes. So I had this little struggle for a little bit with my dad, and he was just kind of the dad that he would come and he would take over and just do all this destruction and then leave me hanging with nothing. He ended up getting me evicted out of my apartment, and I ended up I got a roommate, and I'm not going to say that I was living drug-free at the time, but I guess I was probably doing what a lot of 21-year-olds do at the time,
Mm-hmm.
So I had my son come. I was working at a nightclub, and I was actually making really good money doing that. So I was able to only work there like 2 nights a week, and then so I had my son.
Oh, wow.
And my roommate had her son, and they were the same age. I did really good for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And then my dad entered the picture again.
He left and came back?
Yeah. After I got evicted and I had nothing left to give him, he would leave. So my dad entered the picture again, and I was really struggling to make it, to pay bills and get a car and do all the things that it takes. Because when you start off behind, you're just kind of always behind.
Exactly.
It's like this vicious cycle of just trying to survive.
Yep.
And so my dad came to me with a proposition and told me that he can start getting methamphetamine delivered, through the mail, and asked me if I wanted to make some money. And that's just the kind of life. That's just all he ever did.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking, what kind of a person would ask their daughter that? But it was just that's just him. That was
Mm-hmm.
him. And because my mom was in prison, I thought that I needed him,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
even though he just did nothing but destroy my life and take from me, I thought that I needed his love. And I always that was how he showed it. He started dealing drugs in Indiana, and he was constantly just giving me so much drugs. Like I couldn't even, it was just, I don't know why he just loved when I was high. He liked that feeling. And every time I would tell him I wanted to get clean, he just would give me more and more. And
Was this meth at the time still?
yes,
Okay.
meth.
And are you keeping your job at the nightclub?
No. But
Lost that?
No, yeah.
Can't be there
You
when
can-
you need to be there kind of thing?
Yeah,
you,
you can't.
You weren't showing up?
Yeah, there's absolutely no way that you can hold a job and have a meth addiction.
Makes sense.
Maybe for a couple days or for a couple weeks, but it's not going to last long. At that point, I met my future husband
Where?
through my dad. We both, he knew my dad, and
Was he using meth?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, everybody in my dad's life at the time was using meth. And I met my future husband, and so I moved to Southern Indiana to be with him. And at that point, I was really strung out. I was on meth really bad. Again, I found out I was pregnant, and I knew that I was going to have to, I didn't know how. I just remember I did not know how I was going to quit, but I was going to quit. And so my husband and I just packed our car one day and moved to Indianapolis just to escape my dad. Because when I told my dad I was pregnant, he just kept knocking on the door. You know, I've got some drugs. I literally had to lock myself in my house. And so I just left. I just moved to Indianapolis and started over. And but right before I moved, I had never known Christians, ever. I mean, maybe if I did, it was just kind of in passing. My husband's grandparents were devout Christians. And I remember knowing, I was like, man, these people have so much peace in their life. Like, what is it? What is it? I want whatever they have. I was just so attracted to that. I was so attracted to it. And so I remember I was like, you know what? I'm going to try something, because I was able to stay clean. But see,
While you're pregnant, you were staying clean?
Yeah, but there's a big difference in staying clean and being in real recovery, okay? Because a person can stay clean, but if you're just craving it every day and that's all that's in your head, it's just a matter of time.
Before you do it again. Yeah. Clean is temporary.
Yeah, exactly. And real lasting recovery through Jesus is long term.
Come on now.